Hello guys and welcome back to another episode of Supercoach mates. Well, round 10's done and dusted, and somehow throughout university exams and whatnot, we're still managing to get these podcasts out to you guys. So tonight I've just got Thomas, and we're just going to go through our round 10 sort of points and stuff. But before we get started, I just want to find out how you went over the weekend on your side, Thomas, and maybe a good player and a bad player from the week.
Yeah, I did okay. Thought I was flying when Cornelio, not Cornelio, sorry, Oliver scored like 175, which was nice. And had him at sea. Funny story, I was playing footy myself, and then my own footy game was at 2 p.m. I think it was around 2 p.m. And I thought, fuck it, if I miss out on, because Oliver was my captaincy and my VC was McRae, and obviously a 2 p.m. footy game probably finishes around 4:30,
Yep.
and the North Melbourne game was 4:35, and I thought, well, I'll put it on Neil to be safe because I didn't want to risk it, and if McRae goes shit, then I obviously have to be forced to take him. Well, not shit, but an awkward captaincy score. So say a 110 to 120, which he ended up doing. He ended up scoring like a 104. And I literally, as soon as we finished the game, popped on my phone, and it was about 10 minutes before the game started. And I said, "You beauty, let's chuck it on Oliver." And then copped the 175, so he can't complain at all.
No.
So he definitely started up for me, which was nice. Someone that didn't do so well probably was a few tough ones, because I think in general my team did all right. Missed out on obviously Will Brodie going nuts, which didn't help. But yeah, one person probably sputtered it up. Would probably be Sam Doherty, I'd say, as a primo. Well, I wouldn't say sputtered up, but you've definitely had a disappointing night from his lofty standards, and I think he almost got concussed. So lucky that he actually played out the game and ended up having like a 40-point last quarter or something like that to salvage his score. But someone that was a little bit disappointing and started off my weekend on a sour note. But how did you go, Nathan?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I was unwell all of last week, so I had other things on my mind, such as recovery. So I unfortunately left the captaincy on Max Gorn, and he pulled out another 89. So he has to be the dud, given that he was the captain. He was playing against basically a ruckless. I know they had Goldstein, but still he's gone like 170 against Goldstein in the past, and he only got 89. And I would have gone for Oliver, but you've got him. So I'm going to go for mine and Jonas's mate, which is Will Brodie, which this is going to really hurt Thomas here, because Thomas, unfortunately, is not a Will Brodie owner, and he literally right now is as safe as houses in my forward line. I have no intention of trading him out anytime soon. 144 on the weekend. He was the second highest scorer for the whole round behind Oliver. So you can't complain when someone who started the year at $260,000 or whatever he was ends up being, 10 weeks later he's 525,000 and he's pulling out 144. I guess you can't really complain about that. So moving on from our side, so we're just going to go through a few topic points real quick. Right. So the first ones I want to talk to you about, so obviously Doherty and Crips, both only got 78. I would be lying if I said I flagged last week that I thought Patrick Crips might have a bit of a down game. I think I said that. I thought Mills would go to him, and that's pretty much what happened. So only managed to 78, and obviously Doherty copped a bit of a knock to the mouth, I think it was, by Josh Kennedy. A little bit awkward there.
Yeah.
What do we make of these two? Obviously, I don't think we're going to be trading them out. So just an off week for both of them, or have you got your question marks?
Doherty, I think, was a bit unlucky. He started the game pretty poorly, and it didn't help that when Carlton went on a tear to score 10 goals to nothing or whatever they did in the second quarter, he was off for half of it with the concussion, and the mouth and the nose and whatever have you. And to score a 78 in the end was pretty respectable considering he was on peanuts at halftime. So yeah, he's one that I think his ceiling is. I mean, his floor is not a real concern. He just does the job week in, week out. He was stuck on the bench in a few awkward spots as well. So he's someone that I wouldn't be too disappointed with what he started. But yeah, Paddy Crips is an interesting one. Obviously, was pretty much the second highest averaging player. Basically, I think if you take out his injury-affected hamstring game.
Yeah, he was.
But now now he's pretty much posted 2 sub-80 scores or whatever it has been. I think the issue with this one was he just looks a little bit tired, so I think the bye will do him wonders. Obviously been ripping form, but the other one that I don't know if this is a matchup thing or something they've stuck with, he was playing a bit of ruck over the last 2 weeks from what I saw.
Okay.
Which was a little bit concerning. So he was taking, not necessarily, it wasn't taking centre bounce rucks, which I think you'd be crazy if you chuck Paddy Crips in a centre bounce ruck with the PCL injuries that the ruckmen are getting in the last couple of weeks or last month. But yeah, he's taken the around the contest rucks, which is obviously I don't think it's impacting his score a huge amount, but it's something to maybe keep out and watch. Because obviously they've got Pitney out for a long time, and DeConning is only a young kid, so and he hasn't fully developed his body yet. So to have Cripper as a bit of a backup, not a backup ruck, but a backup kind of stoppage ruckman, because he's basically the second tallest guy on the team, is a little bit concerning. And I don't know if that's correlated directly to his poor scoring, but 2 sub scores. I mean, obviously against Sydney, I think we did flag it in our previous podcast last week that Sydney are a pretty hard midfield to score against.
Yeah, and
because of their contested nature.
Yeah, and I flagged the Mills would go to him as well, which is what happened.
Yeah, so he's one that I guess isn't too bad, but one that I'd be a bit careful with. But I think the bye could come in pretty handy with the first bye rather than him having a last bye and having to maybe suffer through a couple more tough games. But I think having the bye in 2 weeks will definitely help him, and I think will help his scoring come the back end of the season. But he's definitely not a huge concern yet.
Yeah, I've actually put the captaincy on him for this week. I think he's going to make a statement against Collingwood.
He could well.
Obviously, me being a Collingwood supporter, it hurts me to say that, but he always does well against Collingwood. We just don't have a matchup for him. So I think he might be back to his best again this week. So here's my captaincy. Anyway, what about Jack Carroll? Have you got him? It was one that I was tossing up between him and Maurice Rioli Jr. And I think Rioli's won that battle just at this stage, yeah.
Yeah, not necessarily with scoring potential. Maurice Rioli Jr. scored 7 points last week, and I had him on field. So Carroll's one that is a little bit of a concern if you have him. I think his job security is a little bit shaky. He doesn't look great off that half forward line, and I think with the return of Hewitt and Kennedy playing career best footy as well, he doesn't get much midfield run. He gets a little bit when they're up and about, but he just doesn't touch it at all in the half forward line. He barely had any shots on goal. I think he had 1 shot on goal or something like that, but barely touches around the half forward line. He had all his touches pretty much in the midfield when he rolled through, and I think there could be a bit of concern for just him being a young kid and could get rested or managed or even omitted, and someone like a Will Setterfield coming through. But that's just my opinion. I guess Carlton supporters would have something else to say about that, but he's a pretty highly touted kid, and I guess for example, I had Cooper Hamilton from GWS as the other option, and he got dropped, so he's not making any more money at the moment, which is a bit of a concern for myself. So Carroll at least made a bit more money, but yeah, his scoring has gone off a cliff since his 94 to start his season off, whereas Rioli Jr. scored a 67 or whatever, which is, you definitely take that after a disappointing 7 points last week.
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone really here to talk about Sydney. I think Mills and McCartan and Heaney are still just going along nicely. So, although I did see here that McInerney only got 52, so that's we're going to keep reminding you about him, Thomas. For those of you guys that don't know, Thomas actually started with Justin McInerney, and I think he had to dump him after round 1. So,
Yeah, pretty much cut my tyres after one round.
Yeah, that's a bit of a rough start there. So moving on to this game, so the Geelong Port Adelaide game. I want to talk to you about Patrick Dangerfield. So I don't know why you would have him, but there's probably some people out there who do have him. He copped an injury on the weekend. Only scored 65. Hasn't really done well that week. In fact, he's only in 3,500 sides. Is this just to cut your losses now on Dangerfield, considering he's not playing?
I wouldn't be sure why you'd be picking him. Or obviously, if you start him, it's a different question. Potentially, maybe you thought that he could get forward status in the next round of DPPs, but yeah, cut your losses now if you've still got him. He's just not reaching the heights that he once used to. There's players ahead of him now, Supercoach wise, and I think Geelong, they're just a little bit getting old in the feet in their midfield. I think Dangerfield's past it, and he's just copping niggle after niggle, which is not good for him. And I think they're just going to keep him in wraps as best as they can when they need him. That they're still beating teams in and around the competition like they need to. Their forward line's deadly, so they don't need him. They're not over reliant on him and like Selwood week in, week out. But yeah, if you have him for whatever reason, I'd cut your losses and just get him out.
Yeah, I don't think there's really anyone else from Geelong. I will touch on Zach Butters from Port Adelaide here. Sort of bounced back 100.
Yeah, definitely bounced back, which is nice.
But the
Rosie,
I want to talk to you about Connor Rosie. So only the 46. He's a bit up and down. I think a couple of weeks ago we flagged about his sort of inconsistency. And that's probably come to the fore. So what do you think about Rosie?
Well, you probably chuck Travis Boak in the same sentiment. They're both kind of players that started off really well. Rosie probably had that patch where that he got chucked in the midfield, but I think we're all in the same boat that he probably wasn't consistently going to get midfield time, which showed with his poor score on the weekend, like 46. I don't know if there was an injury attached to it. I didn't watch the game, so
just playing
forward. Yeah, so he's one that I think he's just. Butters is one that's a lot more going to be in midfield compared to Rosie. Rosie's a lot more of a talented forward and he can really rip out a forward line really well, whereas Butters, I think, is much more consistent in the midfield. Butters did have sickness and then hits left, right, centre for that period of time where he was really suffering. So he's backed it up against a pretty strong Geelong outfit. So he's one that I think, if you traded him, I wouldn't say it's a mistake, but if you kept him, then you definitely keep him from now on in until you see some drops in performance.
Yeah. So moving on to the Bulldogs game, a bit of a strange game this one. But the one I want to just talk to you because there are a few players from this game that we'll touch on. So Luke Cleary, who's now on the bubble, has scored I think 62, 61 and 75. He's $117,000. Do we like what Cleary provides, or is this just a case of the Bulldogs are just a no-go zone for rookies?
It's an interesting one. He's one that if he gets picked, I'm going to get him in because it allows me to swing Paddy McCartan or a Sam DeConning up forward, which definitely mitigates any points there that are risky, a la Nick Martin, who scored 49, and obviously Rioli and McComb not going to score 70s week in, week out. Cleary, I don't know, from all reports, I didn't watch either of the Dogs in the last 2 weeks. Apparently looks pretty composed. And he scores pretty well, like 75 in the high 60s the week before. And he, can't complain with that. Obviously, you're not going to expect that week in, week out. I think he's more of a bench option than anything. Just to keep your cash chain going. I don't think there are too many other rookies on the bubble this week, which is a bit of an issue. You'd be disappointed if you brought in Buku Kama, so I think we all expected him to have a dip, and I think 12 points off, 5 disposals and a really low time on ground could spell a rest for him or a managed. He's one that I think might have been a bit of an issue. But yeah, one question before we move on to the Gold Coast guy for you, Nathan. Obviously, Bontempelli and Baz Smith both scored really well this week. they're probably going to get forward status next week, I think. Pretty much it. I think it's confirmed from the percentages there on the forward lines. They should be getting forward DPP. If you had to pick one, who would you pick between the two? And do you think it's too many if you have the likes of Dunkley, McRae, Bontempelli and Baz, and then potentially, people that have gone with a Treloar or a Liberatore, and then when Tim English comes back, people are pretty keen on him as well. If you think there's too many dogs in the one basket for your side when you're pushing, 6 or 7 dogs players in your side each week.
Look, I think pre-buy, I'd be very, very concerned about doing it. But I think post-buy, it's a different issue. And I think post-buy, you've got to look at those types of players, Bontempelli, who can just literally rip a game off his own boot. And there's another guy who's coming up for another side that's actually quite cheap that I've got my eye on. We'll touch on that when he comes around. But yeah, I think Bontempelli, if he gets forward line, I think he almost becomes a must-have just because you don't want to miss his 150 scores. He doesn't mind throwing out a 70 odd every now and then, which I guess is a bit of a question mark. But if you've got, say, a forward line of, say, Dunkley, who's a little bit more consistent, Heaney's a little bit more consistent, I think you can afford to have Bontempelli, and if you get to sort of a 70 or 80, you might be able to cover him off with, say, a Dunkley 120 or a Heaney, say, 120 as well, and it sort of covers off his lower scores. I'd be happy to pass on Bailey Smith even if he gets forward. And Treloar, I'm just not sure about Treloar's disposal efficiency. I think it has improved since he's gone to the Dogs, but I think Bontempelli's the one that I would be eyeing off as a forward. I don't think I'd be going near him in the midfield, but I think as a forward, he's someone who I would definitely think you should be looking at. Now, I want to touch on the Gold Coast Suns here. So, Gold Coast 3 main midfielders, so Anderson, Miller, and Rowell, all didn't get above 65 on the weekend. What on earth happened here?
Obviously I didn't watch the game, so I wouldn't really have many ideas. I think Rowell seems like a trade if you still have him for whatever reason. I think, Nathan, you're one of them, so I don't know if
I am
considering trading Rowell this week, but I think he's a bit of a danger to get traded now. Might have just been an off day, but it seems like you just can't rely on him to persist with consistent hundreds. Miller's a bit of an issue. I mean, you look at his dream team or AFL fantasy score 82. 19 as well is a bit of a concern. I think he just didn't get near it throughout the day. I think the Dogs midfield just overpowered the Gold Coast midfield.
Yeah.
I don't want to go too much off a limb, but I'm not sure if the David Swallow move into the midfield has affected the regularity of the scoring from the other three. I don't know about this match, but I'm pretty sure he's now scored. I've just had to look the scores up on here on my computer. He scored 3 tons in a row. So 123 in round 8, 101 in round 9, and obviously round 10, 119. So he's one almost to look out for to see how it's impacting the other 3 midfielders or Miller in particular, because he's one that's obviously done pretty well in the last 3 weeks. So, and we all know what he's capable of. Swallow is a very good footballer, just been smashed with injuries and form slumps and whatever. But yeah, back to back. Tons from him is maybe a sign for Miller as a bit of a dangerous situation, but nothing to worry about too much yet. Might have just been a complete off day from Tool.
Yeah, I think the Bulldogs midfield, I mean, they're going to do this to a lot of sides, I think, in the second half of the year, just overwhelm them. I mean, we saw last week in round 9, they literally just destroyed Collingwood through that midfield. They could barely get their hands on. I think they were like plus 150 disposals. So I think the Bulldogs are going to do this to a lot of sides. So I'm not too concerned about Miller. In fact, I'm not even that concerned about Rowell, given the fact that Miller only scored 59. But I mean, I think Rowell, look, he's probably in the Whitfield camp for me now, where it was almost you've got to get rid of him. But I've got other areas I need to fill first. But he's on borrowed time. I'll say that much, Matt Brown. Moving on to this other game here. So North Melbourne and Melbourne, which I think went the way most people would have expected. Want to touch to you on Angus Brayshaw, which is someone who some people have probably picked up in the back line, given that he's a defender midfielder. Only the 54. Can you see him being a top 10 defender, or is there better options out there than Brayshaw?
No way. Yeah, no way. Top 10 defender, not even top 20 defender, I think. The issue with him is just, so up and down. I don't know why. He maybe is a bit of a budget option if you were limited with cash for trading at Whitfield or something silly. Yeah, Brayshaw is just not relevant. Could be more relevant with the injury to Ed Langdon going down, but I don't know how that impacts the team structure, but I wouldn't be reliant on that injury to pick Brayshaw. But I think the top 6 to 10 defenders are so clear cut this year, and they're about 10 to 15 points ahead of the rest of the competition. I think you just don't want to risk your defenders. Like, I think enough people have gotten sick of Jordan Ridley scoring like crap as well. So I wouldn't risk it with definitely not with Brayshaw.
Yeah, and obviously Max Gawn only 89, but he was the 4th highest scorer for this Melbourne side. What would you do if you had Max? His break-even's 180. Is there a potential sideways here, or is it just a matter of just riding the wave with Max?
I think, I've got him. It's not worth going to like a Sean Darcy, and I wouldn't go up to Jared Witts. I mean, you could if you had the trades, but I think he's lost enough cash as it is. You're just hoping he'll bounce back, and I think he looked a bit dodgy with that knee. He definitely didn't look right. He spent a lot of time forward, a lot of time on the bench, and still popped out of 90. So I wouldn't be too concerned, considering that a lot of people were in the situation where Bruce was a laid out. So a lot of people ended up either a donor or had to have Hayes on field alongside someone else. But if you had Jared Witts from round 1, you'd be laughing, and you wouldn't have lost out too much on Gawn. You'd be definitely ahead by now. But as a Gawn owner, I wouldn't trade him out. I don't think it's worth the money that you pay to start off with to either pay up big time for a Witts or sideways to a Darcy, who he himself is prone to just so many injuries himself.
Yeah, I think that's enough on that game. So moving on to this Adelaide game. St Kilda game here. So obviously St Kilda won. Bit of a strange game this one, and I think Adelaide led for most of the first 3 quarters and just ran into Max King. We got the Saints across the line here. But we'll touch on Roy Laird real quick. So believe it or not, that's his lowest score since his first game, and that's 105. And I think everyone's a little bit unhappy with that, considering he's pretty much gone 120, 140, 120, 125, 120. So a little bit quiet, but I'm not really surprised. I want to talk to you about Mitch, Hinge and Josh Shelley. So obviously you probably shouldn't have these two by now. But if you still have these 2 players, are these definitely players you want to get rid of, or can they provide some value, or can they provide some value for you now?
Rochelle, you have to get rid of before even this situation happened. I think you'd be in trouble with your side if you still had him. I think he leaked enough money, and he was always never going to score too well in that game, and he obviously got subbed out as well. So young kid, probably a bit tired out as well from playing consistently. Hinge is probably one that if you still had him for whatever reason, I'd probably hold onto his buy, just because you might want some maturity on your bench if that's the case. But I think you could do worse things than trade him out as well if you need to get up to a Bontempelli or a Bailey Smith leading into the DPP changes this week. And if that's your route to him, to one of those guys, then that wouldn't be too bad. But touching quickly back on Laird, and I brought in Laird and Dawson, so I was pretty happy with those 2. Laird was a little bit concerning. At 3/4 time, he was on about 60, so he had about a 40-point last quarter, which was nice. And I think that's good that you can see that Laird he doesn't go too low too often. Like, I know last year was pretty similar, not as consistent as this year, but last year was exactly the same, where his lows were probably about 80 to 90, which you weren't never really concerned with him. You would never stink it up and get a 50. And even this time, like you see on Fan Footy there, he only had almost 80% game time, which is pretty low for his standards. And he's just uber consistent, and 24 disposals for a ton is definitely good to see. But yeah, one St Kilda player that I want you to touch on. I want your opinion on, Nathan, is obviously Jack Sinclair. He was one that I considered bringing in myself between him and Dawson. The only reason I went Dawson was because of buy structure, because I've already got Doherty, Hewitt in my backline. So my backline would have been a bit weakened with Sinclair in. But Sinclair, no surprises there that with Steele out of the side, scored quite nicely, almost a 140. Which is what we like to see. Obviously, Adelaide like to leak points to opposition defenders a lot of the time, and he just had his own footy for most of the game. Is he one that you're considering bringing in either this week against North Melbourne, who could also do the same thing, or one that you're targeting after the buys? Because obviously St Kilda's got that first buy, so you'll have him for the rest of the season uninterrupted. What are your thoughts on Jack Sinclair for your side?
No, he's in my side right now. I've actually already done my trades for this week. I've already done them. I've got Cleary in, but I kept on to Whitfield last week. And I've got rid of Whitfield this week, and I have gone with Jack Sinclair. He just seems to get the ball, and I did notice as well that the pleasing thing about this was that Brad Hill actually dominated as well, and Sinclair still did quite well, which I think was always the question mark, was if Brad Hill did well, then what would Sinclair look like? But they both did really well on the weekend. So yeah, he's in my side at the minute. So obviously he's a D5 on my field at the minute. Obviously I've got one spot left there, which I'm still hoping George Hewitt will come down at some point, but it's not looking likely. So yeah, I think you can rely on him now, especially as you touched on with Jack Steele being out. I think he's probably going to play more through the midfield, and he's a natural ball winner. So I think you could do worse things than pick Sinclair this week at 530,000. I think he's a top 6 defender easily at the minute. So yeah, I think just enjoy the ride with him. I think he's just I think he's really cemented himself now in that St Kilda, at least midfield structure, backline structure, sort of. He sort of plays a bit of a quarterback. They like to get the ball in his hands. And if Hill goes forward more, then, Sinclair's the one that they like to get the ball in the hands of. So he's probably a bit like Bond, to be honest with you. He might be prone to a 70, but I think with Stewart and Sicily and Chris just being ultra reliable, I think you can sort of go down that path. And if he gets a 70, well, you probably got Stewart, who's going to get a 110. Chris might get a 110. Sicily's on fire at the minute. So, yeah, I don't think it hurts to have him. And you definitely want to be on the end of his big scores.
No, that's fair enough.
So I don't think there's really anyone else from this game. Obviously, if you still got Jay Gresham, he was a good buy at the start of the year. He's one I wished I had. He's now 445,000. Another 100+ score. So that's good if you picked up Gresham at the start. We'll move on to Dream Time now. So obviously, the Richmond side, what about Josh Gibcus? So I've actually still got him on the bench, and I think he's a really safe player on the bench. He's not going to score, 80 or 90 every week, but he's just going to give you a solid 60, 65 points week in, week out. What would you do if you still had Gibcus? Would you consider keeping him like I am, or do you think his time's up?
Not quite. I think you can probably hold him to the buy. He's a pretty safe player. I wouldn't hold him for any longer than that, because I think by the end of the buys, you'd be pretty much looking at a full side regardless, and looking at even bringing in more premiums than your bench if you had space. But yeah, Gibcus just does his role now. I think everyone was a bit sceptical about him as a bit of a lockdown intercept defender, but he started off the year slowly, but he's almost at 350k, which is pretty much made enough money given his elevated price tag to ship him off, and he'll be good for you, I think, for the buys coming through. Once his buy comes through, I think you ship him off and finish off your defence. And I think that'll be the case for most people. I think it's handy because a lot of people missed out on him. Obviously, DeConning, everyone had it, and McCartan, most people had, but you had Gibcus as well. You'd be pretty happy with that because it meant that you probably have an extra bit of cash to upgrade rather than having to find that money elsewhere.
Yeah,
but,
I
was just going to throw a question to you quickly from the Essendon side. I don't think there's too many other Richmond players we talk about here. But yeah, Darcy Parish, obviously 128, that was scaled in the end. It wasn't originally 120, it was 107 score. Would you be concerned? I mean, this is probably a question targeted at Jonas, but he's obviously not here today. But what are your thoughts on having 43 disposals and only scoring, barely 130? You'd be expecting a lot more from that, surely, or are you kind of in the boat that it doesn't matter how you get the score to get a 130, you take any day of the week or just under. But are there concerns there that we all knew this was probably going to happen against Richmond, who don't really do much pressure on, pay much attention to opposition midfielders, but 43 touches for that score. Do you reckon that's a good enough representation, or you think you'd be a bit disappointed and want more out of that?
Well, I'll quote Jonas here and say that he gets the pill a lot. And I know that Jonas will probably be listening to this and he'll probably be proud of me that I said that. But he does get the pill. And if you don't get the pill, you can't score. But I would definitely have thought that if you're having 43 disposals, that you're probably getting about a 140, at least 150 you'd be looking at. I think the problem with Parish too is he doesn't really have a kick on him. He seems to like to handball for whatever reason, which is amazing because I think from what I've seen of him, I think he's a really composed under pressure. So I don't know why he doesn't kick the ball more, and obviously kicks will give him more points than what handballs do. But I definitely think he's probably Essendon's best midfielder now. I think he's gone above Merritt and Heppel and those guys. So, I mean, you could do worse picks than him. Personally, for me, I have 2 spots left in my midfield. So he might end up getting squeezed out just because he's not a high impact player. He's a bit like Tom Mitchell, in that he needs a lot of the ball to get the scores that he gets. But yeah, I think if you've got him, well done. But I think if you don't have him, I think he'd be someone I'd be happy to sideways and let him burn me. I guess a bit like Brayshaw as well. But the one I wanted to touch on is Nick Munn, who only scored 49 on the weekend. I've actually got rid of him this week. What would you do if you've had Nick Munn? So I presume you still got him. So what are you going to do with him this week?
I mean, I'm definitely trading him out. I think Cleary's coming in for him through a bit of DPP. I think Martin just seems a little bit tired, to be fair. Like, I was expecting him to, bounce back and score pretty well against Richmond, but just seems to have been a bit tired out. And I think first year in the AFL system might have caught up to him a little bit, and probably is due for a rest. But I think with the state of Essendon's players at the moment, he kind of is just in their best 22 by default. So I think he'll get that rest at the bye and then hopefully freshen up. But yeah, it looks a bit tired, and first year in the system probably has a bit of an impact there.
Yeah, I think so as well. So moving on to this game, so the Giants and the Eagles game, which I think went the way most people expected. Obviously, Mark McVeigh's first game as caretaker coach, and I was happy to see. I want to touch on Stephen Cornelio real quick. So played the forward the last few weeks of Leon Cameron's reign, and then Mark McVeigh's thrown him back in the midfield. He's got 140 with 36 disposals. Clearly, probably the best player on the ground, maybe outside of Perryman. Have you still got Cornelio? And if he keeps getting the midfield time, can he be one of these top 6 forwards at the end of the year?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, I kept him purely because Jack Steele got injured, so I probably got lucky in the sense that kept his 140 on field. Because if I had the decision to trade him out between him and Martin, I probably would have gone Cornelio ahead of Martin anyway because of break evens. But he almost met his break even and scored really impressively, which was nice to see. And I think that's obviously correlated to him being in the centre bounce rotations a lot more compared to Leon Cameron's tenure at the Giants. But it's yet to be seen what's going to happen. There was no Lockie Ash, who played a lot of centre bounces previously before he went out late, and Tim Taranto as well. So who knows what's going to happen with him in the next coming weeks, but it is pleasing to see him, get a 140 against a decimated West Coast outfit. I think that's what you were expecting if you were to hold, is to really see what would he do against a decimated West Coast side. To get 140, you wouldn't be happier. You couldn't be happier with that score. And I think if he stays in that midfield, he's got every right to become a top 10 forward and, be a respectable forward player in your F6. And I think end up being a bit of a POD, considering I think I saw on Twitter it was pretty much like 10% of the competition got rid of him. So, yeah, he's one that I think if you kept him, no, I wouldn't say well done, but we've kind of got a bit lucky there. But definitely one that I'd wait a little bit. But I wouldn't trade him out this week unless you might think that, unless you're in the camp that you're pretty confident that, the likes of Ash and Taranto come in could affect how he goes moving forward. And if that gets you to Bontempelli, he seems like a must-have if he gets forward status, it could be a move that might pay dividends later. But I think you could probably afford to hold him out for a couple of weeks and just see what happens.
Yeah.
Because if he's pumping out these scores, you wouldn't expect 140s every week, but if you're pumping out hundreds back in the midfield, you'd be pretty confident that he's going to rebound and end up being a respectable last trade out option or a luxury trade out.
Yeah. So someone else I want to touch on. So obviously our colleague Jonas isn't here, but he is an Isaac Cumming owner. He only got 71 on the weekend, so he's gone 89 and 71 in his last 2 weeks. He's now down to 550 of 545,000. His break even is 162. What do we make of Isaac Cumming? Is this someone we could potentially look at bringing in, or are you happy to sideways on him?
I mean, I'm probably going to avoid him altogether. I think I've got one more defensive spot left, and it's probably going to either be Sinclair or Stewart if I can get my hands on Stewart at some point in the season at a discounted price. Yeah, Cumming didn't surprise me that he scored unders against West Coast. I think the ball just didn't go down there that often, and he didn't have to do much down there. I think his score does get impacted with the amount of kickouts he takes. He's obviously their main kickout taker. I just didn't see the appeal. I think there was definitely scores he's getting 120s, but he's not consistent enough. And I think with Himmelberg going down there, apparently, from what I heard online,
he did. He played in the back line.
Yeah, and he apparently took some kickouts as well. So that could actually impact Cummings' role moving forward. And if Himmelberg is that main kickout taker all of a sudden or suddenly becomes another tall option down there, which apparently worked quite well, whether or not McVeigh persists on that, but it seems like they completely restructured their coaching. And there could be a few different moves moving forward. So it seemed to be working okay, and they batted up West Coast. But as we say, playing West Coast is nothing to be too proud of nowadays with how decimated their team is at the moment.
Yeah.
So, he's one to watch out for if you do own him like Jonas is, because could be a bit of an issue impacting his score with Himmelberg down there. Also scoring pretty well as a defender. But yeah, Cumming wouldn't be trading out anytime soon at the moment. You just hold, and hopefully it's not a Whitfield 2.0.
Yeah, and obviously we'll touch on Toby Green's at 89. So I think as a forward, I think he's probably a safe option, but I think you've got to be prepared for these sort of yo-yo scores he's had. He went missing against Carlton last week. But moving on to West Coast. So one player who did actually score quite well before he got injured was Alex Witherden, who got to 600,000, I think, at some point. He was averaging about 100. I don't know what he was averaging. It was like 110 or 120 at some point. But only the 68 on the weekend. He's down at now 558,000. Break even
Yeah.
157. What do we make of Alex Witherden, given the fact that he has shown the potential he can score with a big 152 game against Port Adelaide? What do we make of him? Is he someone who we could look at, or are we just avoiding West Coast players completely?
Yeah, I think personally I wouldn't want to bring him in now. I never really rated Witherden scoring potential to do it consistently over 22 games. He's done it all the time he did it in Brisbane and wasn't even their best 22. I don't think he's genuinely a very good footballer.
That's a
Not
good
be
knock
rude or
on.
anything, but I just don't think that, he just doesn't correlate
Impress
over
you?
to consistent scoring. Yeah, or impress me on field. I mean, I said that about Brody, and Brody's turned the ship around and playing his best footy in his career. So I just don't think Witherden impresses me down in defence. He just gets the cheap kicks. Essentially, he was getting a lot of his scoring because Ham would kick out to him in a forward pocket, and then Witherden gets a mark and then gets a long kick out to the wing. He hasn't been really damaging for them. Obviously, it's pretty hard in a decimated West Coast side, but I still believe that McGovern's return impacts Witherden as well, because I don't think it's a direct correlation because he's played in the same side and still scored okay, but I think they're just sharing it down there between the two of them. And you've got Hearn as well, who does exactly the same thing when he's playing. So yeah, when all three of them are in the same side, it becomes a bit of a guessing game on who scores incredibly well. If Hearn was out the side permanently, and that might be a bit different, but yeah, with a few down there that can kick the ball, I think. I know when McGovern, I've watched footage of a bit of West Coast games, and yeah, when Gov gets the ball, he's definitely not passing it off as well. So yeah, Witherden relies a bit too much at the moment on the free, cheap handball receive and kick. But yeah, he's one that I wouldn't be too concerned yet. Maybe give it one or two more weeks, it might be a bit of a problem. But someone I wouldn't bring in because I think we've got a top 6 to 8. We're pretty set at the moment.
Yeah, I would go along with that too. I'll just quickly touch on Greg Clark as well. So I think he was the most traded in player last week. Got 55. He went up. What did he go up? He went up 67,000. His break even still -8, so he's got more money to make. I'm actually a little bit disappointed with that, considering he went 100 in week 1, but I don't know how realistic that was.
Yeah.
So moving on to this basketball game here between Hawthorne and Brisbane, because this scoreline resembled more of a basketball game rather than a football game. So someone I want to touch on with you is Tom Mitchell, which you're probably going to say, why am I touching on Tom Mitchell? But I just want to take you back to last year, real quick. So last year, all right. So pretty much at this same identical point last year, Tom Mitchell was $508,000. He was only averaging 101, and he ended up averaging 117 for the year. So he pretty much went gangbusters in the second half of the year. In fact, he didn't score under 110 after his bye. Pre-bye, he had 5 scores under 100, and obviously, as I just said, post-bye, he didn't have a single score. Now, if I have a look this year, he's had 5 scores under 100. He's at 498,000. He's had a rest. He's come out and got 129. Is this guy a sleeping giant at $498,000? Because I'm going to put this to you. So it doesn't matter what a player does at the start of the year. Okay, obviously you want to have the runs on the board, but if Tom Mitchell's going to come out and average 120 for the rest of the year, is he someone who you just have to get in, or are you more of the sort who goes, okay, I'm going to look at the whole year and pick them based off the whole year? Because he has done this, in fact, even in his Brownlow year, he did this. So what do you think on this Tom Mitchell decision, given the fact that he's so cheap and he's got such a high scoring potential?
Yeah. Well, how much is he at the moment?
He's
just over 5.
He's
Or is he still under 500?
He's 498,500. So his break even's 125. So if he does something like this again next week, I think some people, aka and myself, are going to really start to think about bringing him in, given his scoring potential. And the fact is that he's got the runs on the board, and you're not going to be able to keep someone like him down forever. Like, he's going to come good at some stage.
I think the pleasing thing that happened early last week was Sam Mitchell said that they were going to bring him back into the centre bounce rotations, and obviously that correlated into an excellent score, and they won as well. So you really wouldn't complain on what happened there. And 36 disposals, 1 goal, could not complain at all with what he achieved. The good thing about it, if you do bring him in before his bye, he does have that last bye, which is definitely handy, and he plays Gold Coast and then Collingwood in the 2 weeks prior to his bye.
He got gangbusters against Collingwood.
And could go gangbusters against both teams. So he's one that you could almost bring in without losing too much and get ahead of the rest of the pack, especially paying sub 500 for a player of Tom Mitchell's standard. And Brisbane's not an easy team to score against as well. They've got a pretty stacked midfield as well. So to score against them, with Max Lynch as well in the ruck, it's definitely not a bad thing. The only doubtful thing I've got with him at the moment is Max Lynch has got injured, and he seems he's going to miss a bit of footy with his concussion, another concussion as well, and they don't literally have another ruckman in their side at the moment to come in effectively. So I don't know if that means that, because they've got essentially no ruck and they play Wits next week, who should towel up whoever Hawks bring up in the ruck. I don't know if that will impact Tom Mitchell's scoring output, just because he won't get his hands to the ball first, quite possibly, unless he starts sharking Wits' hit outs to advantage. So who knows? I think if you want to be brave and take it, this to be the week. Almost you could wait a week, because they play Collingwood, obviously your mob, who don't have Brody Grundy and have Darcy Cameron. So I think any ruckman could stack up against them okay. But yeah, he's one that I would probably wait one more week and just see how he goes again. And just see if the role is certified. It's nice to know that his break even's still about 125. So even if he gets 130, he's not going to spike up hugely. So I think you could wait almost one more week. But if you wanted to, probably get a cheap sub 500 star, then, you wouldn't be too fussed. And I think you could take the risk, and hopefully he does okay for you before his bye.
Yeah, I think I'm going to wait one more week. I just want to see how he goes. And if he gets another 130 plus score, I think he's going to be very hard to pass up, especially since I still have Rail. I think that's going to be a popular trade. I think if people still have Rail, or someone else who's underperformed, Dangerfield, Selwood, someone like that, they could go to Tom Mitchell, and he could just average 120 for the rest of the year and just ride you home. So obviously, I was pleased to say as well, Sicily got another 122. So I think he's now the number one scoring defender this year, which is amazing. That I think he's number one for scoring, and I think Hewitt's still number one for overall average. So I think if you started with those two, you'd be absolutely laughing. But with Brisbane, I want to touch on Dane Zorko. So 84. So this is someone who we touched on last week as a bit of a cheaper defensive option. What are you thinking with Dane Zorko? Is he someone who you're going to get on, or is a little bit too unreliable?
Yeah, I mean, I was an owner last, and he showed his unreliability through that forward line position and defender position even more so. I think he wasn't even that cheap. I think it was still 540k, so it wasn't overly cheap. But yeah, compared to like the likes of Sicily and Stewart, he was cheaper. But yeah, I was never going to really touch him. I know people brought him in because of their buys and things like that, but I think he's just a bit too unreliable. Like he's luckily his floor isn't too bad, so he's not going to pump out too many 50s and 40s and what have you. But I think he just is a bit unreliable, and he's prone to tags, he's prone to suspensions, he's prone to injuries and little niggles here and there. And I think, Kadeen Coleman as well coming back doesn't really help him too much. It allows him to go through the midfield a bit more, which does help. But I think he's one that I think is just not worth it. And there's safer options out there, especially with Sinclair now scoring really well without Steele. And you got Jordan Dawson, who Jonas would like to hear this, but yeah, I've definitely hopped on board, and I think he's doing good things at the Crows. Those two in a similar price tag. Yeah, there's better options out there at the moment, I think.
Yeah, I would probably go along with that. And obviously Jared Berry scored 82. You still haven't got him, have you?
Yeah, I traded him off. I think he's just done that all year where he starts off well. He had like a 40-point first quarter and still petered out. So, yeah, if you still have him, get rid of him. But I got rid of him a couple of weeks ago. So, yeah, not really relevant now.
Yeah, and moving on to the last game now. So this is a bit of an upset. So Fremantle and Collingwood. In the absolute, I'm not sure if you watched this game, but it was like watching suburban football. Literally, players were just sliding in all over the place.
Yeah, no, I did see this game.
But I want to touch on Andrew Brayshaw. So some people might look at that at 94 and go, it's not the worst score, but given the fact that he's a top 8 midfielder currently, and I think his last few scores have all been sort of around this 90 mark. Just let me get up his score now. Yeah, he's gone 94, 177, 134, 94, 94, but that 134 was against North Melbourne. Are you concerned with Andrew Brayshaw as being a potential top 8 midfielder in the long run going forward?
I'd be a little bit concerned. I mean, I know Jonas says him, so it'd be interesting to see when he hops on next week or whenever he's coming back, to see how he goes or what his thoughts are with 2 disappointing scores. He basically scored most of that 94 in the last quarter, where he had about 10 disposals. And the game was over. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so obviously didn't help that he scored most of his points then. But I think as an owner, you'd expect a lot better score from him against Collingwood, as Collingwood don't really like to put defensive pressure on their opposition midfielders. But I think, the rise of Will Brodie just keeps going stronger.
Yeah.
I think that might have impacted Brayshaw's score as well, which was definitely not what you would have thought coming into the season. But yeah, Brodie it's frustrating as a non-owner because he gets most of his
getting
points.
The ball.
Yeah, I think it's mainly just hard ball gets in clearances, which he's so dominant in, because his around the ball stuff isn't the most amazing thing. Like he'll kick it, 15, 20 metres across the nearest person. So he's not really damaging going forward, but he's just so dominant in the midfield, clearing the ball out. So my only hope is as a non-owner that people hold him for a little bit too long and then he ends up scoring sub-scores when Fife comes back in. But, I think the damage has already been done when he's scoring close to 150 is pretty frustrating. But I want your thoughts before we wrap up on Darcy Cameron. Now, people had their doubts about him as soon as Mason Cox got named. But Mason Cox didn't last very long, unfortunately. I think he had a hand injury or something along the lines of that.
Busted his
which was sidelining for a bit of a time as well. And Grundy's still a fair while off. What are your thoughts on Cameron? If you, I don't know, put it this way, if you need a forward in now, and you want to wait on Baz and Bontempelli and you desperately need a forward because you don't have any cover in the forward line, or you think that Cameron's a bit of a cheaper option, and you're going to get one of those Dogs players a bit later on when they're forward eligible anyway. What are your thoughts on Darcy Cameron as a lock for top 6 to 8 forwards, or is there too much risk attached? Because obviously Cox won't be there in the next couple of weeks. They'll probably bring back Aiden Begg, and he seems to score pretty well with him in the side. And he did 130 pretty well against Sean Darcy. Seemed to move around the ground a lot more, was taking a lot of intercept marks in the defensive 50. What are your thoughts on Darcy Cameron as a forward eligible? And then most or pretty much 100% would get ruck eligibility, not necessarily in this next DPP set next week, but probably the next one afterwards.
Look, I think this is a week for Darcy Cameron. I mean, he is 450,000. His break-even 45. He's working against Tom DeConey.
You are right.
He's still a young ruckman. So I think if you're going to go down that path, I think this is the last week you can probably do it. Because I think he'll probably. I don't think I would want to pay say 480 for a Darcy Cameron. Just because I think at that price you can get Isaac Heaney or someone like that. But I think at that price, I think this is the last week that I would want to do it. But I don't think you can keep him long term. So I think if you do go down this path, I think you're going to have to keep a trade up your sleeve. Because I think when Grundy comes back, he's probably going to go back into the forward line.
Relevant, yeah.
And then I think he's probably going to go back to what he was scoring, which is probably around the 60s, 50s, 60s. So, I don't think it's the worst option, given the fact that there's pretty much no one else at Collingwood who can ruck. I think Begg will come back in this week, which will provide him with a bit of a chop out. But, I think I personally am not going to go down that path because I think I'm still happy with what McCartan and DeConey are doing. And I think I would rather save the trades and just keep using those guys. But I think if you're in a situation, say, you've still got, if you've still got, say, Jack Steele on the bench, or you've got, someone who's not playing as a premium, say if you've got Tristan Zero, like he was back this week. If you can get him in, I think he's a good, cheaper option as a premium forward for the next probably 4 to 6 weeks. And then you're gonna have to get rid of him. At some point.
Cameron, probably you missed the boat. Perhaps 2 weeks ago when he was sub 400 or whatever it was.
It was 330.
Lot safer opportunity to get him in, because that's more of an upgrade situation than, because at 450k you're pretty much saying that he's going to be top six to 10 forward, and not going to. Yeah, exactly.
Just before we go, before we go over quick, sorry. I just wanted to touch on Scott Pendlebury. So this is a guy who I played a couple of weeks ago as being a potential top 6 defender. Only the 73. Does this have doubts? Are you having doubts now about him, or you weren't even considering him anyway?
I mean, I was considering him a couple of weeks ago, but I think he was one that would have been the last kind of scenario, worst case scenario thing. He's in a similar mold to Zorko, where he probably won't get the niggles that Zorko might get, but he's just, one of those things where he gets this odd 70 to 80 there. Just because of how the game's being played. I mean, this game was a shocking game for defenders in the sense of Supercoach scoring, just because it was just wet and
torrential
not good fronting, uncontested footy. I mean, the only person that scored well within that Collingwood side in that midfield was probably Jack Crisp, and he was playing more midfield than defence, and half of those defenders, even they're not really relevant to look at their scoring. Like Darcy Moore had a field day against a Freo forward and still scored 500, and then
Nick
you look
Dacos,
at the other halfbacks. Nick Dacos.
Nick Dacos is still going.
Yeah, he's one that you probably hold throughout the bye now, if you haven't traded already.
I haven't.
But I think that's all we got time for today. Hopefully.
Hang on, just before we go. I keep interrupting you here. Have you got any captain ideas for this week? What are you doing with your captaincy?
Probably most likely it'll be. Let me have a quick look. It'll probably be an Oliver into Macrae most likely. I'd like to see Macrae tail up against the West Coast side and just get possessions for fun. If not, I might be, maybe a Luke Parker into Macrae. But yeah, someone probably into Macrae as a safer option. Unfortunately, Steele would have been a nice option against North Melbourne, but that's never going to happen. Or, as you said, Crips might be a bad option. I just don't really like putting the straight captaincy on Crips just because of what he's full of and his doubts always with injury and shit like that. But yeah, what are your quick thoughts on captaincy and vice captaincy?
Well, I have to actually make sure that I can do the loophole first because Donald and Hamilton both get named, which I think is probably likely given the fact I think McDonald was only managed, and I think Hamilton was only omitted because it was a first game of a caretaker coach. There's every chance that those two will be back. I might not actually be in a position where I can do the loophole, to be honest with you. But if I do get the option, I think it'll have to probably be before the Saturday night game. So I do have a few options there. I don't mind Lachie Neale against GWS. I think Brisbane will be out for blood this week, given what happened in Tasmania. So yeah, I think as long as Hamilton is, if McDonald's not named, then I'm probably going to go Neale into Macrae. I do like the Macrae option. But I do have this idea on Paddy Crips. I don't know. I think he's going to come out. He always does well against Collingwood. So, yeah, I think ideally I'd like to do Neale into Macrae as well. But if I can't do it, then I think this is the one week where I might put the straight captaincy on Crips. Because I think he does have a history against Collingwood of going gangbusters, and he is a big occasion player. And I think there's going to be like 80,000 plus there.
Oh, yeah.
80 plus thousand there. So, like, if you have a look, his low score is 81. His high score is 187. In fact, I think his highest ever score might have been against Collingwood. So, yeah, I think I'm going to go down the Crips route if I don't have an option. But if I do, then it's probably going to be Neale into Macrae.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Could go gangbusters on a Sunday afternoon. But yeah, that's all we got time for today. And we probably won't be able to have enough time to do the Q&A session. Be a bit tough time. This is already going a bit later than usual. So it'll be probably on the socials to answer your questions, hopefully. If you have any, and then I know a couple of you have sent some through that we'll get through in the next coming days before round 11. But until then, enjoy the second half of the Indigenous round, and we'll catch you for next week.